what the National Geographic magazine is all about is about discovery. And I think photography allows it to be a near first-person sense of discovery. And I think the magic of that magazine and why it's been so successful for so long is that it offers us enlightenment that feels like entertainment. It's not like going to school.
From rural Ada, Oklahoma, to an important seat at one of the world's most respected and recognizable magazines, Todd James has certainly taken a singular path. What started as a youthful interest in Ada has evolved over the years into a fascinating career working on the front lines of this country's premier photographic journal, the prestigious National Geographic magazine.
Oh, okay. No, I just wanted to actually, do you think we can do anything about those graphics in the Leave story, or is it just...
James is a senior photo editor for National Geographic magazine, one of just a half dozen talents who helps decide what pictures make the pages month in and month out. It's a daunting task, selecting perhaps a dozen photographs for an accompanying story out of tens of thousands of raw images. It's an incredible responsibility, but one that James truly loves.
My job is basically to help the photographers be better than they would be on their own. So I do whatever is necessary to make that happen. And that varies from story to story. It varies from photographer to photographer. I basically, wherever they're strong, I try and get out of their way. And wherever they're weakest, I try and sort of prop them up and make them a little bit better. The photographers are editing their images too. So we're both editing separately and coming together and then comparing our impressions and our ideas about what are the best pictures and what is the best way to put those pictures together to create a narrative. So we've got to get from this topic, to a point of view, a certain story on that topic, and then where are the best pictures that can be done that sort of tell that story. I tend to think of the magazine as the kind of magazine that you can pick up, and if you want to read it short, if you want to get the story short, you can read through and look at the pictures and read the captions. And this is one of the ways we measure the success of what we do. As photo editors, we think that you should be able to pick up the magazine, look at the pictures, read the captions, and have the story completely, a short version of the story. Then if you want to dig in deeper, you can read the text. There are lots of different kinds of people, and they read magazines in different ways. I think some people start at the beginning of the magazine and read through. I think some people start at the back. I think some people look at the pictures and captions first and then go back and read the text. But we have always held as a standard that you ought to be able to get a short version of the story by looking at the pictures and reading the captions.
Simply choosing the best photographs, however, isn't all that James does from his office at National Geographic magazine headquarters in Washington, D.C. The process is much more comprehensive than that.
And I like this kind of scene. The magazine photography world is predominantly freelance. There used to be staff at magazines like Time and Newsweek and Sports Illustrated. One of the things that we do at the National Geographic magazine is that we value the authorship of the photographer, probably more than any other magazine. And we, just as writers, have a certain style and a certain voice. Photographers, if they're playing at our level, they're going to have that. So there's an art to picking which photographer gets assigned to which story, and that's a lot of fun too. And if you get somebody with a real distinctive vision, that's going to help the whole mix of the magazine. So that's sort of a fun part of it, is sort of pairing up the photographer with the story. On one story, I may do a lot of research and reporting up front to try and figure out where we need to go to photograph certain things. On another story, the photographer may have more expertise than I do, and then I try and get out of their way. But sometimes we even propose stories. So the photographers can propose stories, the photo editors can propose stories, writers, so we're basically involved from the beginning in terms of shaping the story. It's our job to make sure that story is complete journalistically and surprising photographically. So we're right there as kind of an editor-producer all the way along on the story. On that, even though it's on a Hasselblad. We're not just laying down pretty pictures. We're trying to get across ideas. We're using photography as a kind of specialized language to communicate a story. So that's a collaborative process between us and the photographer.
Photography has always been a pursuit for James, a pursuit that started during his teenage years in Ada. One local photographer in particular served as early inspiration.
inspiration was often far away, but it was also, I was lucky enough that there was inspiration right here in Ada. J. Don Cook was at the Ada Evening News, and he was doing probably the best photography in the state, if certainly in the state, and probably the region, maybe, you know, the nation. He was winning all of the state awards and many national awards. And more importantly, you know, every day you picked up the paper, you could kind of count on a great J. Don Cook photograph, and he was, I think he was a bit of a poet with the camera, but he was also had a deep appreciation for the local and regional culture. Between the newspaper in my darkroom and lifeguarding and buying film and shooting film, and you know, it just my interest grew, and J. Don was he encouraged that interest and let me, in fact, take a college course when I was still in high school, audit a college course that he was teaching up at East Central in photography. In fact, I ended up skipping my junior-senior prom to go photograph a hang gliding competition with he and the local television photographer from K10. So it was pretty quickly an obsession.
With Cook's easy guidance, James began to pick his way through the business, always searching for ways to improve himself and, by extension, his professional options farther down the road. An internship at a major metropolitan newspaper provided him with plenty of hands-on experience.
After I left high school, Ada High, I went to OU. And at that point, J. Don Cook was hired by the Daily Oklahoma to sort of run their photography department. And he told me that if I was interested in an internship after my freshman year of college, that I could come work for the Daily Oklahoma, which was the state paper, and that was pretty exciting. So I went on to OU, and at that point, I was, well, after my freshman year, I had that internship. It was a non-paid internship. They ended up hiring me, I think, about 15 months later to work 38 hours a week on the weekend. So I would go to school at OU, and then I would, on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I would get in my 38 hours a week. And I got all this experience, and because I was 38 hours a week, they didn't have to pay me health benefits or anything. The Daily Oklahoman had the best equipment in the state. They had literally had a walk-in refrigerator full of film. And I used to joke that I shot all the film they had, and then when they ran out of film, I moved on. And when I was at the Daily Oklahoman, I would only get to shoot 15 minutes of Sooner football for the Bulldog edition, and then run back, because I was living in Norman. I was you know, in school down there, so I would be the first deadline, you know. But if they started the game 5 minutes late, I had 10 minutes to shoot. So I knew I wasn't going to get to be a better sports photographer that way. So in some odd twist, I ended up quitting this kind of coveted job that a lot of people would have, you know, aspired to go back to work for the student newspaper so I could shoot lots and lots of football and get better at that. And after that, I had always had my eye on the University of Missouri because they had a fairly prestigious photojournalism program. And then after I left Missouri, I went to New York. There weren't many newspaper jobs, you know, when I left Missouri. I think there was one in Joplin. And that was about the only one I knew about, and that was not far enough away from the University of Missouri. So I went to New York a little bit on a whim.
The Big Apple represented quite a proving ground for James, with great photographers seemingly on every street corner. It also proved to be another boost to his continuing education in the field, which was undergoing a sea change.
New York gives you a lot of tough love. I thought I was pretty good and had won a few awards and was probably the best in my class at Missouri, and I thought I was just going to take New York by storm. And I got there, and I suddenly realized that all of the people whose work I was emulating, I was now competing against. So that was kind of a rude awakening. And pretty soon I figured that, I also sort of hit right at that transition between black and white and color. I mean, it seems like a long, long time ago, and it was, but news magazines were just kind of making the migration from black and white to color. I mean, Time was mostly color, but Newsweek was a mix of black and white and color. So that was kind of the new challenge, and a lot of the older photographers were sort of struggling with that a little bit. You know, how do you shoot color? It was a lot less forgiving. films were slow. Time thought there were certain kinds of pictures that they wanted that had to be lit and had to be shot on Kodachrome 25. And frankly, they were the generation that had learned how to photography on using black and white film and Tri-X, which was extremely forgiving, and you could manipulate it a lot after the fact. When you got to transparency film, you process it and that's what you got. If you were a half a stop off, it was a big deal. So I guess that was a little bit fortunate in some ways that I sort of hit that transition. I didn't know how to shoot color either. They certainly weren't teaching that at the University of Missouri. But I quickly figured out that I needed to apprentice or assist other photographers. And so I went into a period of a couple of years of doing nothing but assisting. And then several years after that, where I was sort of assisting and trying to shoot pictures on my own.
Like the old saying about New York City goes, if you can survive here, you can survive anywhere. The ambitious James did indeed survive, and even discovered an alternate route along his unique path, a slight turn in direction that would prove to be fortuitous in the long run.
I was in my mid-20s and I was working for magazines and getting some nice big tear sheets, and my mother loved it. And I loved it too when they came out. And the highs were incredibly high, but the lows were incredibly low. And New York is an expensive place, and I feel like I was sort of making some progress, maybe critically, by my own estimation. I was, looking back, it was reasonably good work for someone in their 20s. But the reality is, I had mounting credit card debt, and I wanted a life with a little more stability. I looked around and said, maybe it'd be better to be on the other side of the desk, and I'd know how much I was going to make this month, and my health insurance would be paid for, and I'd still have the joy of working with photography. My first photo editing job after I sort of gave up shooting was at Fortune magazine. So that's where Fortune was where I made the transition from shooting to photo editing.
Once James made the switch to photo editor, he stopped taking photographs professionally. It was a way of devoting all his creative attention and ability to the projects at hand, and also a means of finding a place for himself.
I made a very conscious effort to give up shooting because I didn't want to be competing with the photographers I was working with. I didn't want to try and get them to shoot my picture. I wanted to try and get them to shoot the best picture they had inside of them. And I'm not sure whether that was a good idea or not. I certainly think that I've seen a lot of photographers who do still try and get the photographers that work for them to shoot their picture. But I mean, these people are more talented than I am as a photographer, so I'm just trying to help them be better. And I guess I sort of feel comfortable in that supporting role.
The move from shooter to editor turned out to be the right one. After a stint at Fortune magazine, James moved on to Business Week, where he worked as photo editor for 7 years. Gaining experience and building his reputation all the while, the opportunity of a lifetime came knocking in 1996, and James answered.
Basically, it's a small industry, and it's like anything else. You sort of build a reputation we didn't have a lot of money at Business Week, but we could treat people well, and we did. And the other thing that was great about Business Week is it was a weekly, and so you got a lot of practice. It's like running wind sprints, So I got a lot of experience assigning and editing in a short amount of time, and I got a call one day. Actually, 3 people called me one day. That's what I was talking about, sort of being a small world and developing a reputation. I think I had 2 photographers and 1 photo agent called me one day and said there's a job opening at the National Geographic.
James has worked for National Geographic magazine ever since, and truth be told, in terms of photography, it represents the zenith. The experience has turned out to be more rewarding than he even first imagined.
On a personal level, I think for me, it's just the enrichment of working on all these different subject matters and all these different stories. And every time I do a story, I learn something new. So in a way, I think I'm kind of a proxy for the reader. I have to find, when I start a story, I have to sort of dig and read and research until I find what's surprising and interesting to me and what I want to look at. Sometimes I'm doing a science story. I'm reading scientific papers, and I don't have a science background. This stuff's like way over my head. I'm reading the abstract and the summary, and trying to make sense of it. But I'll start off those stories, and I have no idea what we want to photograph for those stories. But I feel like, you know, research and reporting will set you free. You know, you just keep reading until you feel comfortable picking up the phone to call somebody, like one of these PhDs that wrote this paper, and ask them a question. And you're hunting. You're hunting for, where is the surprising picture? What's the thing I want to see? Or where is the picture, you know, where, you know, maybe you've got an idea, you know, of a big idea. You need to get like 5 big ideas across in a story. But sometimes it's not really obvious where the best expression of that big idea is photographically. A writer, I feel like writing is much more malleable in a way, but the photographer has to actually know what they're going to point a camera at. That's a different challenge if you're doing a story on the Serbs, you know, or if you're doing a story on a hunter-gatherer tribe, or if you're sort of putting together a story that is no place. I mean, I did a story on robots, and we probably went to 5 different countries and probably 20 different robotics labs. But we had to do the research to figure out which labs we wanted to go to, and who was doing the most interesting looking robots, and who was doing the most meaningful robots, and what were the different things that they had in mind for robots to do. So you're just trying to figure out where the sweet spot is on all those things.
As James closes in on the end of his 2nd decade as a senior photo editor for National Geographic magazine, he again finds himself in the midst of another sea change. First it was black and white film to color film. This time it's the gradual death of film and the rise of the digital image. It's a move about which James has mixed emotions, partly because of his own formative experiences.
I have to confess, I'm pretty old school, and I do love film, and I still work with photographers that shoot film. It's a little bit like the slow cooking revolution, you know? I mean, there's sort of this whole sort of movement where people are trying to sort of cook slowly and, you know, and enjoy the food. To me, film is a little bit like that, because it forces me to slow down. It forces the photographer to slow down. There's something I wrestle with a little bit on digital photography. First of all, I think it has made doing good pictures a lot easier. I think it has sort of raised the bottom. So I think you have this kind of, digital photography has a slightly kind of averaging effect. But I also see photographers who shot with film just shooting like crazy with digital. I mean, you don't ever have to reload the film. You don't have to slow down to do that. You know, you can just shoot thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures, you know, without worrying about the cost of development, or, you know, once you've got the equipment, there's really no cost, you know, to shoot more and more and more and more. But I think I feel like film sometimes made people sort of, because it was a limited resource, made people think a bit more.
Mm-hmm. They're recording it?
Yeah.
He's live, they're recording it? Mm-hmm. It's funny because he actually looks a little bit like the microphone.
I'm convinced that digital will satisfy me as much as film at some point. But right now there's a quality to film that I really love. It's that it's sort of not a completely linear mathematical thing. The digital revolution, well, for one, made it possible for photographers to see what they shot in the field. I mean, you can shoot a picture and you can look on the back of your camera to see if you got it. When it was film, you had to wait, and if they were in the field somewhere, they had to send the film in. It had to get processed, and then we saw it, and we were calling them and telling them. That was part of our role, is to sort of coach them as we're seeing their film as they're shooting. Now they can sort of either look on the back of the camera or download the images and look at it on their laptop every night. So in some ways, I think it's helped some photographers, and in certain genres of photography, some photographers, well, there's a kind of a question. If you're always looking at the back of your camera, you're not necessarily looking at your subject. So I think there's some real benefits to digital photography, but I feel like there's, on the margins, a little bit that's lost.
But he even wrote in
the magazine itself has been exploring new ways to deliver its rich content to readers. With the rise of personal digital devices such as smartphones, tablets, and laptops, the entire print industry must strive to stay relevant and, of course, accessible.
The magazine is trying to find a way to speak to the next generation regardless of how they want to receive what we do. So we see ourselves as storytellers first. and we're telling the stories that we think are important and surprising and interesting and help you kind of broaden your worldview. What matters most is that we're telling good stories and that we're doing it in a highly visual, highly sophisticated way.
Working with the world's most talented photographers, who are in fact out documenting every corner of the globe, remains a thrill for James, who is constantly amazed at the parade of images marching across his desk.
There are a lot of photographs that have come through my office and made their way onto the pages that I love, and have, felt real fortunate to kind of see develop. They come to me as a surprise. You're trying to achieve something, with the story, and it's not like when I began photography and the print's sort of coming up in the developer, but you're working through these pictures on your computer, and you get to a good one, and it's still magical. The picture I have on my door at work is a picture that Martin Schuler shot from the Hadza story, and I think it's a beautiful picture for one, but I also think it was a little bit of a departure from what we normally do, and I'm always sort of happy when I can sort of be a part of kind of stretching the visual vocabulary a little bit, because it hasn't remained constant any more than the style of writing has remained constant. I think every generation responds to a slightly different written language, spoken language, and visual language. So I think we have to kind of grow with that and evolve with the culture that we serve. But that's actually a tricky problem for us, because we're very closely associated with a certain kind of photography, a certain genre of photography. I think of it kind of as romantic realism in a way. But so we can't sort of make an abrupt right turn and say, well, we're going to do the equivalent of like hip hop photography. But I think we need to continually try new things, and for me that picture was kind of a new way of seeing for the magazine. In its genre, I think it is probably the best magazine in the world. There are other great magazines. I think Vanity Fair is a great magazine. There are magazines that have, but they're in a sort of a different genre, and I think we're much more interested in sort of documenting the world. Many of those other sort of magazines that use photography well are maybe more about fantasy, or certainly entertainment. And I think we sort of bridge the gap between making the real world entertaining, and I don't think anybody else does that.
When he's not in the office, James likes to share his knowledge of photography with young people, often working at National Geographic photo camps. It's a way for him to give back to the industry that has given him so much, starting with that first spark of interest back in Ada, Oklahoma.
The National Geographic has sort of allowed me to see parts of the world, both through the photography that I edit, but also through travel. I've been to Saudi Arabia to drink tea and negotiate a coverage. I got to climb up the Brooklyn Bridge. I went to Osaka for a robot conference for the robot story I just did. I get to go to a lot of places and talk to people, and they're opening their doors for National Geographic, and I get the benefit of that. So I've seen a lot of the world that I wouldn't have seen probably if I hadn't left Ada, but it is nice to sort of come back. It's a place where you can get grounded, and it's kind of nice to come back here. It's sort of, there's a center of gravity here, and things seem kind of a little bit more real. It's a visually rich place, and it's my home.